You might have seen these before, illustrations and 3D renders of these oddly satisfying isometric buildings and rooms. Did you know though that you can draw one using regular 2D software like Procreate? In this video I'm going to show you exactly how to do that. First of all, let's create a new square canvas in Procreate, measuring 2048 times 2048 pixels. Before we start drawing, let's talk about how isometric view is different from the perspective we are all familiar with. Have a look at this quick sketch I made. Usually when we draw illustrations with depth of view, we try to replicate the real-world perspective. Human field of view is limited. The further away something is from us, the smaller and less detailed it appears, until it vanishes completely at the horizon level. So for example, in reality these two trees might be around the same height, but the further away tree appears much smaller in the distance. At the same time, the river width might be staying constant, but to our eye it appears to narrow down the closer to the horizon it gets. Let's take another example and draw a straight road instead of the river. Just like before, the distance between the sides of the road will appear smaller and smaller until completely disappearing at the so-called vanishing point. Notice this, the road is straight, so its sides are parallel, and yet in our classic perspective view the parallel lines will eventually intersect. Actually, all of the parallel lines will intersect. Let me show you. On our empty canvas, go to Settings, and in the Canvas tab, toggle Drawing Guide. Then click on Edit Drawing Guide underneath. By default, our drawing guide is set to the square grid, but we are interested in isometric and perspective options below. Let's turn on perspective, and currently it is empty because we need to add a vanishing point first. Tap anywhere in the canvas, and what you get is this point that lies on the horizon line. All of these lines are in fact parallel, and they all collect at one point. The thing is, as we are trying to model a 3D space, we might have parallel lines going in all sorts of directions. So if we slightly move this point to the left and add another one on the right, suddenly we have a set of parallel lines in another dimension. How is this helpful in illustration? Well, sometimes we need to draw geometrically perfect figures, like a square. However, in our field of view, under a certain angle, a square might visually appear as a rhomb. And as many rhomb shapes as there are out there, only one will look right in this perspective. This is where the guidelines come in handy, so let's try to draw a square using them. Find an intersection point of two guidelines, which in real life will be perpendicular to each other, and draw two lines coming out of it of same length. I'm using these smallest line segments as units or steps, so both of my lines are 2 steps long. From here, use the next closest guidelines to complete the parallel sides of the square. As you can see in the drawing, the further away sides will appear smaller. I'm going to move it to the side for now, and now let's have a look at how the same square will look in isometric view. Go to Edit Drawing Guide, and at the bottom switch to Isometric. Let's adjust the guide size to match the steps we've had before. Next, I'm doing the same thing, finding an intersection spot of two guidelines and going 2 steps to the left and to the right from it, then using the nearest guiding lines to complete the rhomb. This time all my sides are same length, and the closer and further away edges actually have the same angle. If we make cubes out of our squares, the difference will now look something like this. So the biggest advantage of isometric view is that this further away edge appears more visible to us, so it gives us a better view of all the little details you might want to include in your illustration. Isometric view is therefore hypothetical, which also adds to this kind of illustrations looking unreal and sort of magical. However, it is still a mathematically accurate system, which requires drawing lines under strict angles. This is why, especially in isometric view, guides are so helpful. And as you already saw, we will be using the drawing guide a lot. In this tab at the bottom, you can adjust the grid size and thickness. We will set the grid to 40 pixels so that we can draw even the smallest details easier. You can also change the guide transparency and color at the top if you'd like, In the bottom right corner, you will also see a function called Drawing Assist. If you turn this on and try to draw on your canvas, you will see that the drawing direction is now locked to guidelines only, even if you try to draw a horizontal line. The Drawing Assist is indicated in the Layers tab under each layer. You can also turn it on and off in this view, clicking on the layer and then selecting Drawing Assist. If you create a new layer, by default it is without Drawing Assist, so you can actually control this function for each layer individually. Alright, we are now going to create a rough sketch for the illustration. Let's select a brush. I'm using dry ink, and let's go for the dark purple color from the color palette. If you'd like to use the same color palette as me, I will leave all color values in the description of this video. First of all, let's mark an intersection of two guidelines, approximately in the middle of the canvas. From this point, we will draw diagonal lines, 12 steps to the right and 12 steps to the left. Now add the third line from the same dot, this time going 12 steps vertically. From the top end of the vertical line, again go 12 steps to the right and to the left. Add 2 more vertical lines connecting the ends, and complete the top to form a cube. From the front top vertex of the cube, count 1 step up and mark that point. From here, draw 4 lines, each 10 steps long, forming a row. What I want to do now is add a bit of depth, creating sort of an indent in the cube top. The edges of the indent are going to be 1 step tall, however only the 2 back edges will be visible. This is because in this angle of view, the front 2 edges will cover what's behind them, whereas the back 2 will open up to our side. Let's call this angle of view looking up. Next, we will add a window on the right wall. Our window will measure 6 times 8 steps. This time our angle of view changes. You can imagine it as looking to your right. This time the left and top edge will hide what's behind them, whereas the right and bottom edge will open up. So this is where the indent will be shown. Let's also draw a little window planter with flowers. We will make it 1 step wide and 8 steps long, just like the window, and 1 step tall. Now I want to draw some separating lines on the window in its middle. However, to find the middle, we shouldn't forget that the window is 1 step deep in the wall. That means what is visible to us is not the whole window, but part of it is hidden by the wall. So the middle of the longer side is actually here. And the middle of the shorter side is at a 3-step split. Next up, we will add a little roof above the window. Switch to the eraser tool and remove overlapping lines. You will notice that eraser is also locked to guidelines, so you need to temporarily turn off the drawing assist to move around freely. On the left wall, we will draw a door 2 steps away from the edge. The door measures 7 times 4 steps. The indent of the doorway will be visible on the bottom and left sides. One step above the doorway, we will draw a shop sign. Let's make it 2 steps in height and 8 steps in width. 2 steps to the left from the door, we will add a little shelf that's kind of leaning onto the wall. We will draw the first leg right along the wall. The other one will merge with the house edge, so we don't really need to draw it. Next, we will add 2 shelves, the first one attaching to the middle of the legs and the second one offset by 1 step down and to the left. To draw the missing 2 legs, we actually need to turn off the drawing assist. Our line will connect the top of the first leg and the spot on the ground 2 steps away from the wall. To turn your line into a perfectly straight one, at the end, hold down the pencil to enable quick shape function. Repeat on the other side, and with the eraser remove the overlapping lines. While the drawing assist is still off, let's add some irregular shapes, like flowers for this planter. Simply draw a bunch of leaves and flowers to fill it up however you like. Now we can also add some wavy fringe to the roof. I want to draw a little window and a sign on the door, but first I need to find the middle, just like with the window. I have found my middle and I draw a 2-step long base for the window. Next I mark a spot 1 step above the middle of my baseline, and now I want to draw a curve through that dot. To make it a bit more interesting, let's split the window into 4 equal segments. Try to kind of eyeball where the half of this curved line is. On the other side, you can use the guide to help you. For the sign, I draw a rectangle half a step below the window. So now the question comes, how does text look in isometric perspective? I want to add text to the sign and align it with the sign's edges. First we will create a new layer and write the text somewhere close to the sign for size reference. Next we will use the transform tool in the top panel. It allows you to move your objects and transform them. With the uniform option selected, you are able to rescale the object without proportion changes. If we, however, select distort, we can now individually drag around the edges of the selection box, thus distorting the object. The idea here is to align the box with the guidelines, so that each side of the transform box is parallel to the respective guideline next to it. We will do the same with the shop sign. We can use the same trick for round objects. Let's say we want to add a round pot with a plant in front of the shop. Create a new layer and draw a perfect circle. For that, draw an ellipse, hold down your pencil at the end, and with the free hand tap anywhere on the screen. With the transform tool, switch to distort function and align the selection box with the guidelines. And as you can see, a circle in an isometric perspective is an oval. Adjust the size of it to your liking and duplicate the layer. With the transform tool, offset the oval upwards, exactly over the first one. We can now merge the two layers together. Turn on the drawing assist and draw the missing parts of the pot, and with the eraser tool remove overlapping lines. By the way, once you're done with the text layers, you can also merge them down onto the main sketch layer. Now, remember our angle of view where we were looking up? Like in the case with the roof indent, it will apply here too. However, since the object is round, we will draw a curved line to indicate depth. All that's left now is to draw a plant. And this one is all done. You can draw some more plants on the shelf or some vases with freshly cut flowers. The vases are of course going to be see-through, so technically I should not erase these shelf lines, but for now it just helps to better understand the sketch layout. With the drawing assist back on, I add some striped details on the roof, simply following the guidelines. And in the top right corner of the right wall, I am adding a pole for another sign. I make it half a step wide and tall and 2 steps long. So I want to make the sign shaped like a flower, and we will again use the distort function for it. On a new layer, I draw a pretty regular 2D flower and distort it to align with the isometric perspective. Then I merge the layer down to the original sketch. And to add a bit of depth with the drawing assist on, I draw diagonal lines from where the petal facets start and end or appear as edges to us from this perspective. The rest of the facets will not be visible to us as they are covered by the sign itself. Now I connect these lines copying the curves of the original flower. And lastly, erase overlapping lines. Let's add a base to this shop that it will stand on. From this dot, we will go 18 steps to the right and 18 steps to the left. Next, we complete the back sides of the room till intersections with the house walls. Now let's add some volume to this base, and we are going to make it 3 steps in height. I also want to split the base into 2 layers to make it a bit more interesting. So the top part is going to be grass layer and the bottom is going to be the soil. To add some more details on the base, let's draw a little passway from the door and give it volume 2. Turn off the drawing assist and add some stones. I'm basically just drawing a bunch of irregular shapes here. I also add some flowers and grass details on the base. Turn the drawing assist back on. Let's now add a brick texture to the house. Starting from the top middle vertex of the house, go 1 step down and 2 to the right. This will be the longer side of our brick. The shorter side will measure 1 times 1 step. Let's complete the 3rd dimension on top. And here is our first brick. It will serve as a reference for the alternating pattern, and the rest of the bricks we can just draw in a bulk. In the next row, the bricks will be aligned in between bricks of the previous row. I mean, I'm sure you know how bricks work. For this row, the longer side of the starting brick will be on the other wall of the house. Next, we move on to the left wall. Don't forget about the doorway and the window. I did forget about the window myself, so I ended up finishing it when already coloring later on. Here I'm finishing the last bits on the top of the house and we are finally done with the bricks. It is quite a satisfying process. Next, make sure that your sketch is on a single layer and use the transform tool to slightly move the sketch a few steps down. Make sure to align it with the guidelines again. This is only for the purpose of having a bit more space at the top. Now we will decrease the layer opacity so that it doesn't distract us too much. Create a new layer on top and turn on the drawing assist. Mark a spot one step up from the bottom edge of the empty space on our rooftop, and from this spot we will go 8 steps left and right, basically all the way till the bricks. Complete the row. From each vertex we will then go 8 steps up and then connect those 4 vertical lines at the top. Now we have another isometric cube. Find the middle of the front baseline, which is 4 steps from either end, and draw another vertical line 8 steps long. Repeat on the opposite side. From the intersection with the roof of the cube, draw another 4 steps up. Now we will add a curved line, and for that we need to create a new layer. You don't need the drawing assist for this one. We want to create a curved line that goes like so, connecting these 2 points and going through this one in the middle. Once you draw the line, keep holding down the pencil at the end point. This will turn your curve into a quick shape that you can then edit using this function at the top. Once you are happy with your curve, go to Layers and duplicate the current one. Then use the Transform tool to move the line towards the opposite side. Go to Layers once again and starting from the top one, merge arches together and then with our second sketch layer. With the drawing assist on, we will add some more lines to complete this little greenhouse structure. With the drawing assist off, we will connect the intersections of this outer roof outline and the center point on the front side. Hold down the line at the end and wait a few moments to turn it into a perfectly straight line. With drawing assist on and counting 5 steps from the bottom edge, I add 2 more lines on the side walls for some structural support. And the greenhouse base is all done. With the transform tool, select everything on this layer and move it just half a step down. This way it is centered in the empty space on the rooftop. Go to Layers and create a new one underneath the current one. We can also decrease the opacity of the greenhouse layer to not block our view. Now it's time to draw a bunch of plants in pots, and we will use already familiar method for it. I draw an oval, hold down at the end point to get a geometrically perfect shape, duplicate the layer and offset it vertically. Merge the layers together, erase the part that should not be visible, add the details, and of course your plant. And repeat many more times, as many as you want actually. I find it easier to erase unnecessary overlapping lines as I go, as it helps to better understand the layering of the objects and how much space I have left. I also decided to draw a little raised flower bed with some sprouts. Next, let's bring back the opacity of the greenhouse layer and turn off the visibility of the house layer. Erase the lines that should be hidden behind the plants. We will then swap it around. The greenhouse layer is hidden and we can focus on erasing the unnecessary brick lines. Once done, turn the missing layer back on and merge all of them together. Our sketch is now all done and you can recenter it if you'd like. Before we start coloring the sketch, let's decrease the opacity of the sketch layer and create a new one. Drag it underneath the sketch layer so that even when coloring you still see the outlines. Depending on the shape you want to start with, you might need to turn on the drawing assist and pick a color. I will show you a few examples of how I color the shapes and some tricks that might be interesting for you, with most of it being the same for other parts of the illustration. I'm starting with the soil base at the very bottom, so I'm going for this brown color. Next, following the outlines, I now try to draw very clean lines. For every shape, create a closed outline and then fill it. Moving on to the next shape, create a new layer. I usually create a separate layer for every next shape of a new color, especially if shapes overlap or attach to each other. One thing you need to make sure is that all your layers are in correct order. Basically, objects that are at the back in the design should also be lower down in layers list. Following the correct order, you don't need to worry about overlapping shapes. For example, here I can draw this whole romp even though half of it shouldn't be visible, since later on I will place the house layer above the current one. Having every shape on a separate layer is also handy if you want to later easily update the colors. Now, there are cases when you have shapes which need to strictly align with the borders of something underneath them, like with these stones on the pavement. And a handy tool to use is clipping mask. Create a new layer above the pavement layer and set it to clipping mask. This limits your drawing field to whatever is on the layer underneath, so everything outside of the pavement simply won't be visible. To color objects like pots, we will actually need 3 layers. On the top one, there will be the front part of the pot. The one underneath will contain the soil oval. And the one at the very back is the highlighted inner part of the top. Leaves will go on a new layer on top of everything. The same clipping mask method will be handy when we draw the brick outlines. First, I color the base and make sure to correctly place the layer under the plant in the pot we just colored. Then create a new layer over it and set it to clipping mask. Now you just follow the sketch, and if you want you can only draw the visible lines. So for example, I'm leaving the space where my window will go empty since it won't be visible anyway. Shapes like window, flower bed, door, and the shop sign are simply outlined and filled. I used a clipping mask to add details on the roof and the flower pot. From time to time, I like to turn off the sketch layer visibility to see how things are coming together. When you color the shelf, a little tip is to put the legs that are at the back and the front legs on separate layers. This way you can fit a layer with shelves in between, and all elements will overlap correctly. For jars, I simply fill them with blue color and decrease the layer opacity. You can draw some water on the layer underneath and adjust the opacity as well. The flowers themselves can go on top of everything. The top floor is all about arranging the flower pots in a way that you want. Finally, let's color the greenhouse structure. And since it will be white, I will first change the background color to any darker tone so that I see what I'm doing. I will color this structure in two parts. First, I will create a new layer with drawing assist right above my roof base layer. Next, I paint all parts of the structure that are at the back and will be covered by plants. Next, I create a new layer on top of all my plants and complete the missing lines of the greenhouse. Let's switch the background color to dark purple to make our house stand out more. And at the moment it looks a bit bland since there are hardly any shadows. There are actually no shadows here right now. So here is an easy way you can add them. Let's start at the bottom and throw a shadow over the base. Create a new layer over the soil layer and set it to clipping mask. Then go to transparency modes and set it to soft light. We will go with the same dark purple like we used for the background. If we imagine that our source of light is in the top left corner of the screen, it means that the right side of the base will be in shade. Simply draw a rectangle covering this side and fill it with color. As you will see, the transparency blending mode will change the color of the shadow based on which color is underneath it. Repeat the same with the next layer. Of course, the house itself will throw a shadow over the meadow, so we will place it above the meadow layer. However, we also want to cover the flowers on it. So in order to do that, first set the flowers layer to clipping mask. Since all of them are anyway contained within the green base, it won't really change much. And what changes now is that we can create another clipping mask layer on top, meaning that the shadow will now cover the flowers but stay within the bounds of the meadow layer. This little patch of grass is on a separate layer above the house, and we can simply eyedrop the shadow color and fill it in manually. The way I do it is I set the layer to alpha lock and simply color it with a new color. Let's also add a shadow under the window planter. For that, I create a clipping mask layer above the brick outlines. For every shadow layer, the color and transparency mode will remain the same. I must have accidentally deleted the layer with window details because it's gone, so I recreated it. Right above it, I'm adding another shadow, which is falling from the roof onto the window. The illustration is already looking much better, but there are still a few more shadows we can add. One of them being the shadow on the indents in the walls. We can use the same layer to draw a shadow over the doorway, and while we are still on the layer that's clipping to the house, let's add a shadow from the sign too. Reusing shadow layers is handy when shadows are located on the same surface. For example, if we go back to our meadow shadow, we can add some shadows from the pot and the plant in it. The shadow from the shelf, however, should fall over the pathway, so the layer with it should be above the pathway layer. So essentially, every shadow layer goes under the object that the shadow comes from and above the surface onto which it falls. Unless the shadow goes all the way to the edges of the surface, you don't really need a clipping mask, like with these shadows from the glass jars, for example. The pots in the greenhouse will of course also throw a shadow onto the roof base. Don't forget that the edges of the rooftop will also be shaded. One last detail is to make the greenhouse look like it's actually made of glass. Find your top outlines layer and create a new one underneath it. Then trace just the outer outline of the whole greenhouse and fill it with yellow color. Set the blending mode to soft light and turn this layer into an alpha lock. Next, we will switch to a spray paint brush called medium nozzle. You can adjust the brush size, and now you can play around with colors and spray different parts of the shape until you get this interesting gradient. One last detail for the greenhouse will be on a new layer on top of everything that is also set to soft light, and with the white color I'm going to draw some blobs to imitate the fogged up windows. And lastly, on a new layer with a bright yellow shade, add some highlight details wherever you want on the side where our source of light is. You can endlessly keep adding details, but for this video I will stop here. I hope you enjoyed this tutorial, and thanks for watching all the way till the end. If you want to see more drawing videos like this one, make sure to subscribe to my channel and comment below what else you would like me to draw. Don't forget to hit that like button if you found this video helpful. Thanks, and till next time!